السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه الطيبين أجمعين. Today's symposium examines one of the important issues in English related to English poetry, which is line pattern of English verse amid literary epochs. تطور تركيب البيت الشعري الانكليزي عبر العصور الأدبية. الآن ما هو البيت الشعري؟ وما الذي نعنيه بالبيت الشعري وكيف يتم ضبط البيت الشعري؟ A line is a unit of language which a poem is divided into a process of arranging words using lines and line breaks is known as lineation and is one of the defining features of poetry. A line is generally determined either by units of rhythm or repeating oral patterns in recitation that can be also marked by other features such as rhyme or alliteration or by patterns of syllable count. إذن البيت الشعري الإنجليزي كما هو في الأنظمة الشعرية في آداب العالم المختلفة هو تركيبة لغوية مجموعة من الكلمات يتم يعني ضبطها وفقا لميزان وإيقاع معين يرتبط بالنغمة بالإيقاع الشعري ويرتبط كذلك بالقافية الشعرية ويكون عادة مقسم إلى مقاطع معينة يعني هذه بدورها تنقسم إلى وحدات. Line pattern of early medieval English poetry. Now I'm going to follow up to show you how the structure of or the line pattern of English poetry has underwent change along history. Let me start with the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes who invaded Britain in the 5th and 6th centuries, and they brought with them the common Germanic meter. So the old line pattern of English poetry started with the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes. After the invasion of Britain, they brought with them the earliest or the oldest shape of the English of line pattern of English poetry. So the line pattern of early medieval English poetry is based on the single line units of accentual verse, so that each single line is divided at its center by a pause or caesura. Rhyme either links instead of rhyme. Old English poets have developed alliteration. Yani if we look at this line, this poetic line, this is from early medieval English poetry, and it is written by a synonymous poet. A song I sing of sorrow unceasing. If you look at this line, you notice that it is this is a line pattern of old, or they also call it early medieval English poetry. طبعا it's translated from, it's not written in this language, but translated into English. It is divided in the middle. There is a space. Notice, have a look at the space in the middle, and have a look at something else. It is not controlled, it's not governed by the rhyme or the rhythm, but it is controlled by alliteration. So this is why medieval English poetry is known as alliterative verse. Notice the alliteration. We have it is here. I tried to write it in bold. A song. So notice the repetition of the sound sa sa sa. A song I sing of sorrow unceasing. This is how old and medieval English poetry was controlled by the alliteration. Or have a look at this. This is another line from medieval English poetry, and it is written in the medieval dialects, in one of the medieval dialects at that time. Notice the methodus miahte onder his med go banke. Notice the repetition of the sound ma, ma, ma. This is also known as alliterative verse. After the Norman conquest, French poetic models of line patterns supplanted Old English ones of unrhymed alliterative verse. So one point of the Old English poetry is that before the conquest, before the Norman conquest, it was first of all, one point, it was unrhymed. The second point, it was alliterative. It means that it was controlled by the number of alliteration found on the same line. Number three, there is a space, or it is the same line, the same single line is divided from in the middle either by a comma or a space. Now, after the Norman conquest, changes took place on the line pattern of the English poetry. So instead of the unrhymed alliterative verse, poets started to employ rhyme, stanza form, and a specific pattern of metrical feet with alternating stressed and unstressed syllables. إذن بداية تطور النمط البيت الشعري الانكليزي إلى من خلال ضبطه من خلال القافية والنمط المقطع الشعري، تقسيمه إلى مقاطع شعرية. يعني قبل النورمان كونكست لم يكن الشعر الإنجليزي مقسم إلى مقاطع. يعني الستانزا form was only found after the Norman conquest. So if you look at this example, that certes, but ye make me heavy chair, me where as leaf be laid upon my bier, for which unto your mercy thus I cry, death heavy again, or ele mot I die. طبعا the mot, this mot at the end of the last line means must. Notice that every two lines, this is a stanza, يعني it's very clear that the stanza form started in writing English poetry started after the Norman conquest. This poem is written after the Norman conquest, and it is divided. This is just a stanza quoted from a poem at that time. And as you notice, طبعا this stanza is four lines, so that every two lines are rhyming together. Chair, bear, cry, die. And also it is divided into syllables. So it is divided into syllables, and they control the metrical feet. Notice another important point we notice here, the use of French utterances. For example, or ele mot I die. Ele here is a pronoun used to address for the feminine, for the female. Okay? Now we come to the time of Chaucer. Chaucer's greatest contribution to English poetry was the heroic couplet. So the heroic couplet was started first, or it was first introduced at the hands of Chaucer, Geoffrey Chaucer, in his greatest work, the Canterbury Tales. A monk there was, a fair for the mastery, an outrider that loved venery. Now, what is of course, the heroic couplet is two lines. The meaning of the couplet, it's a stanza of two lines, having including 10 or 11 syllables, written in iambic pentameter, and they should be rhyming together. So they should be rhyming together, they should be written in iambic pentameter, and they should include 10 or 11 syllables. What I mean, of course, you know what we mean by the iambic. Iambic is a unit on the line, the poetic line, that is composed of two syllables, starting with unstressed, then stressed. Da, dum. Da, dum. So the repetition of this da, dum or ta, tum for 5 times is called iambic pentameter. During the Elizabethan age, Elizabethan poetry is notable for verse forms, including the sonnet form, blank verse, and the use of the classical materials. The format of Elizabethan poetry was traditional verse using regular meter and rhyme patterns. Blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter. So blank verse was a kind of poetry, unrhymed poetry, but written in iambic pentameter. So the poetic line in blank verse is unrhymed, but it's controlled. It's written in iambic pentameter. That is the repetition of the iamb 5 times on the poetic line. Most of the so that we see that it was mostly written for used for writing plays, like, for example, overlays of Christopher Marlowe, William Shakespeare, mostly written in blank verse. And in addition to the songs, to the lyrical songs that Shakespeare used in his comedy plays, hand in hand with the blank verse. Shakespeare did not invent blank verse. However, as that credit goes to the Earl of Surrey, who used blank verse in his translation of the Aeneid, an epic poem by the Roman poet Virgil. The English sonnet form used by Shakespeare is also the innovation of Surrey. So the age witnessed the flourishment of different various poetic structures and line patterns, especially and verse forms, especially the blank verse and the sonnet. And as you know, the English poets were not the first who write the sonnet, who experimented writing the sonnet, but because before them there were the Italians, especially at the hands of Petrarch. But they made changes, and until the time of Shakespeare, who perfected the form of the English sonnet. Actually, it was not the form that Shakespeare perfected, but he also perfected the content as well as the form. The Edmund Spenser then adapted the sonnet to create his own form, which is known as the Spenserian sonnet. The differences among the Petrarchan, Shakespearean, Spenserian, and Shakespearean sonnets lie in the grouping into stanzas and the rhyme scheme. Shelley wrote some poems that were not in sonnet form, including the 4-stanza poem, The Things That Cause a Quiet Life, which is a translation of a Latin poem by Martial. Notice the meter. This is an example of a poem written in iambic tetrameter. Iambic tetrameter, which means the repetition on the line, on the iamb 4 times. And we said that the iambic pentameter is the repetition of the iamb that is unstressed, stressed. Yani da dum for 5 times. Now iambic tetrameter means the repetition of the iamb 4 times. Yani da dum, da dum, da dum, da dum. That is on one line. Notice, have a look at this. And we have the rhyme scheme. We have alternative rhyme scheme. Notice, the faithful wife without debate. So if we make a scansion of this line, we will find that the iamb is repeated 4 lines. That's why we call it, it is written that the line pattern of this poem is iambic tetrameter. And notice the rhyme, which is the rhyme scheme at the end, debate, which is rhyming with estate, and night is rhyming with might. This is called alternative rhyming. William Shakespeare was not, as we said, was not the first to write sonnets in English, but he became perhaps the most famous sonneter, and therefore the English form is also sometimes called Shakespearean. Yani, as you know, he was not the first English sonneter he was not the first sonneter in English poetry. Before him, there was Thomas Wyatt and the Earl of Surrey and other poets, but he was just the one who perfected. So at his hand, the English sonnet was perfectly divided into 3 quatrains and a couplet, and which is rhyming A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. And as concerning the volta means the change in the tone or the conclusion that the sonneter raises. You know, at the beginning of in the first quatrain, Shakespeare talks about a special issue or raises an argument. Then he starts elaborating it in quatrain 2 and quatrain 3. Then in the couplet comes the volta. At the beginning of the couplet comes the volta, which makes a change in the tone and introduces the reader to the concluding point. And this is the main difference between the Petrarchan sonnet, which is divided into octave and sustet. So it's not just the idea of dividing the number of the lines or the stanzas or the rhyming, but it's also the matter of the volta. Let's have a look at this poem. This is sonnet 18. This is one of the famous sonnets in Shakespeare's sonnet sequence. Sonnet 18, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. This is one of the poems in which the poet is talking about immortality, linking immortality with the beauty, human beauty, and with poetry, so that he is telling the addressee that your beauty will be immortalized through my poetry. If we, I don't want to focus on the content or the idea or the theme of this poem, but what matters to us today is the scansion or the line pattern of this poem. If we take an example of the first line. The first line is written, this is a sonnet that is written in iambic pentameter. So all Shakespearean or all English sonnets, mostly, almost English sonnet at that time was written in iambic pentameter. So again, what we mean by the iambic pentameter is the repetition of the iamb for 5 times. Let's have a look at this first line. Shall I? So the words written in bold or the letters written in bold means the stressed syllable. So here we have 5 units. This one single line is divided into 5 units. 5 units, so that each unit is called iamb. Why is it called iamb? Because it includes 2 syllables. The first one is unstressed, da. The second one is stressed, dum. Shall I compare the 2 is summer's day? Notice is some. So notice again that the letters or the words that it's not, you notice that compare here is itself a unit, is a unit by itself, because this word is divided or includes two syllables, and the first syllable is unstressed, whereas the second syllable is stressed. So this line pattern, the line pattern of Shakespearean sonnets, is iambic pentameter. Now let's move forward to the 18th and 19th century, to Romantic and Victorian age. During the late 18th and early 19th century, meter became tied to questions of the connections between poetic forms and content. So now they pay more attention to the content. So now the content during these two ages, the content started to determine the structure or the line pattern of the poem, because according to the content of the poem, the emotions and the poet should, or the subject or the theme that the poem represents, they should be intermingled with the form. Romantic and Victorian poetry often considered in terms of its recurring themes and the important revolutionary historical and political context that shaped them and was shaped by them. These themes were expressed in meters and forms of a great variety. Some reach back to antiquity, others were newly invented, and many were put to new occasions and uses. Let me give you an example of how the content determines the structure or the line pattern of the poem. I have in mind a poem by William Blake, the early romantic, some critical books refer to him as a pre-romantic poet. Other critical books refer to Blake as a first generation of romantic poet or as early romantic poets. In his poem, Tiger, 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 burning bright in the forests of the night. This is one of the poems which is found or which is written in his poetry collection, Songs of Experience. And as you see, what is interesting in this poem is the switching of the line structure. What do we mean by the switching of the line structure? The poem, let's divide it into stanzas, and the stanza takes the form of the quatrain. I mean by the quatrain, a stanza of 4 lines. Divided structure, 6 quatrains. So, stanza 1. What he says in stanza 1: Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what mortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In this very single stanza, what is interesting is that he starts the line pattern of the first and the second. The first 2 lines is structured according to the iambic pentameter. Iambic tetrameter. But he switches to iambic, trochaic pentameter. Trochaic pentameter. What we mean by trochaic is quite the opposite of the iamb. It is a unit on the poetic line which includes 2 syllables, so that the first syllable is stressed and the second syllable is unstressed. So it is the opposite of the iamb. iambic. يعني it starts as dum-da. Now, iambic trochaic pentameter means the repetition of this trochaic 5 times. Now he switches from the trochaic pentameter to the iambic pentameter in order to control the rhythm of the sonnet. The rhythm of the sonnet, because the sonnet, which in order to be identical with its content, حتى يتطابق الشكل مع المضمون, he makes this switching in the line pattern of the poem. So in order to control the accelerated rhythm, يعني it takes reading the rhythm of this poem is full of power and energy in order to be identical with the theme of the poem, which talks about the tiger as a symbol of power, energy, and experience. Now, let me move to modern poetry. Practitioners of modernist poetry who flourished between First World War and the beginning of the Vietnam War broke from Victorian and Romantic tradition and sought new experimental ways to structure their work, including free verse and condensed lines. The modernists showed that poetry does not necessarily have to rhyme or be constrained to a prefabricated form, which might hinder the poet's creativity and the progression of ideas. Let's have a look. So the line pattern of the modern poem is quite different from the line pattern and structure of English poetry in the previous generation, in the previous ages. Let's have a look at this line from Audin's poem, Musée des Beaux-Arts. The title of this poem is in French, and it means in the Museum of Fine Arts. And as you know, it was a habit of English poets to use some French utterances or French titles for their poems, even though they are written in English. Notice, have a look at this line. About suffering they were never wrong. The old masters, how well they. This is one long line. Understood, it's a human position. So for the modern poets, the content is much more important than the form. They don't care of the form, the rhyme, the metrical system, and even the length of the lines. So you notice now how there is a big difference between the length of the two lines. It is unrhymed, and there is does not follow the line structure or the line pattern of English poetry of the previous generations, and it is unrhymed. So instead of structuring each line according to rhyme or meter, Audin exhibits a line pattern freedom, not ordinarily seen before his time. Modernist poets, what is important about, let me remind you that what is important about modernist poetry is that it follows a call by Ezra Pound, a call for avant-garde or avant-gardism, or to make it anew. Modernist poets often choose to use short, simple lines that prompt the reader to concentrate intently on the poem's images, without the weightiness of lengthy lines and stanzas. So, have a look at this poem. This is a short poem, and notice the lines are so short, and they are not determined by the standards of syllables division or the line patterns. They are, as we said, so short and unrhymed. And they just focus on the image that it represents. So they focus on the image, and on the content rather than on the system of rhyming and on the line patterning or on the metrical feet. Many modernists weren't concerned with keeping stanza lengths consistent in their poems, unlike their predecessors who generally tried to achieve regularity within each work. Like, for example, in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, the speaker talks of hearing the mermaids singing each and each. This is followed by a single line. So they do here. T.S. Eliot imposes one single line after a whole stanza. So he doesn't care just because he sees that this single line is very rich in content and it deserves to be put alone. So this is why it is a little line after a whole stanza. So does not, again, T.S. Eliot does not follow the system of stanzaic form, and he imposes one single line after the stanza. So Prufrock was looking at the standing alone at the seashore, imagining that he sees mermaids, and he says, طبعا mermaids in this poem symbolize female love or the presence of women in his life. So he thinks that I don't think that they will sing to me. It means that I don't think I will I will gain a woman's love in my whole life. So this is the end of my presentation. Again, I want my presentation focused on the significance of form. What actually made me think of the subject of this, the importance of this topic, is that recently most teaching of poetry is based on the content rather than the form. And we should have in mind that form and content are interconnected, and we cannot ignore one of them at the expense of the other. Thank you very much. ما أعرف إذا أحد من الحضور عنده سؤال أو أستاذ عباس.
بارك الله فيك دكتورة.
ممنون لك. يعني إذا ماكو سؤال معين